we got inspired yesterday by the song. So we're going to share a song with you first. Maybe we should introduce ourselves. Hi, my name is Karri-Lynn. For those of you that I don't know or see all the time, I work with the Coady Institute. Krista and I co-facilitate many Indigenous programs, and I am active in the ABCD and First Nations group with Michelle, and Jess is sometimes there, and I saw some other familiar faces yesterday. And yeah, we mostly facilitate the Indigenous women's leadership programming, and have very lately developed what's called Building on Abundance in Indigenous Communities. And that's really what we want to share that work with you. So if you're in the opening yesterday, you've probably seen the principles before. Krista?
Coady, Krista Hanscomb, Delewe Wakangek Mi'kmaq Nation, Elugay Circle of Abundance, Coady Institute. This is my first Unconference, so I'm really excited to be in the space with all of you. My name is Krista Hanscomb. I'm from the Wakangek Mi'kmaq Nation, which is about 20 minutes away from St. Vex and the Coady Institute. And yeah, I've been with the Circle of Abundance for just a little over a year. I'm excited to share with you all today.
Since we're such a small group, I'd love for everybody to come off mute and just introduce yourself. Gord, you're to my right.
I went off because I was chewing something. Sorry. This is my supper hour. I'm sorry. My name's Gord Cunningham. I'm recently retired from the Coady Institute. I spent about 20 plus years working in the ABCD area, around the world and a little bit in Canada. And I'm just delighted to be here with my former colleagues.
Please pass it to the next person, Gord, in true ABCD fashion.
Amanda is next to me on my screen, so I'll pass it to her.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Palmer. My pronouns are she, her. I now reside in what's colonially known as Ottawa, on the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, but I continue to build community through my work, which is at the Community Development Learning Initiative, which is a Calgary-based network for community-minded people. And that work mostly takes place on Treaty 7 territory. Next to me is Krista, but then below me is Terry. So I will pass it on to Terry because Krista's already given us a great welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I am Terry Bergdahl, currently in Chicago on lands now known as Illinois that were under the waning influence of the Cahokia indigenous community in the 18th century when Europeans first arrived. My most recent focus of engagement, meaning the last 6 years, has been a board member with the ABCD Institute. And I will pass it to Mary.
All right, colleague, Mary here on the, I'm in Chicago as well, but I'm on the lands of the Council of Three Fires and unceded lands, and that suffered from forced removal and genocide and stolen land. And I'm committed to the Indigenous rights, to racial justice, and to cultural equity. And am really happy to be in this session. I loved the panel this morning from the opening session that got us off on the right foot. So I'm happy to be here. I'm going to pass it on to Hope.
Hope Switzer. I'm on Treaty 2 in Brandon, Manitoba here. I am a community development coordinator, so I do lots of programming and stuff in the community. We have some really cool Indigenous programs that my colleagues run, and I'm always kind of a part of that, but so I just wanted to learn a little bit more, I guess. Oh, I'll pass it to Gord. Has it gone? Did I say it? Okay, Krista.
Krista went to Anna, I think is that. Anna, do you want to go? Thanks, Hope.
I can go next. My name is Anna-Karin. I am in Sweden. I work at the Central Agency for Gender Equality, but a lot with co-creative methods, and ABCD is really interesting for me. We are now doing a local project with local communities on local democracy. But the reason I'm here is because I have some ancestors, and we are going to help the central government to do conversations, to do dialogue with the Sami people representatives. So yeah, I'm really interested to hear about how you work, guys. Thank you. I pass it to Rachel.
Hello, I'm Rachel Girdler. As of last month, I am back in the US, but I spent the last several years living in the Amazon River Basin, working with the Shuar community. So they're an indigenous group in the lower Ecuador, northern Peru region. And I just switched roles from living there full time to working with Proyecto Protégeme, which does the prevention aspect in schools predominantly of commercial sexual exploitation. And one of my new roles on the team is going to be kind of coordinating our volunteers in 12 countries that work with their indigenous populations. So I'm just trying to get all the information that I can stepping into the new role. And I will pass it to, I don't think Michelle has gone. She's next to me.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I've had my camera off because I'm eating breakfast. So sorry about that. I am coming to you not from North America. I'm coming to you from a little island in the South Pacific called Australia. And I'm on Tanarang land here, so part of the unceded nation, unceded lands of Australia. And I'm here because it's a passion of mine. Obviously, it's about my community, and always love to see the work that Coady are doing in this space, because I think it's truly a space that you guys are leading globally in lifting the voices of Indigenous people and supporting Indigenous practitioners. So great to be here. And I think Jess is last to go. I haven't heard from Jess.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, folks. I have some internet connectivity issues with the rain, as happens for some reason in my home, so I don't have video on, but really pleased to be here. I'm joining from Mi'kma'ki, the territory of the Mi'kmaq peoples, currently known as Nova Scotia, Canada. I have the great pleasure to work alongside a few of these folks at the Coady Institute. The team that I work to support focuses primarily locally in Nova Scotia on creating more meaningful and equitable employment opportunities. And it's been a really interesting journey to help integrate more ABCD principles and ways of working alongside our partners in the Nova Scotia government, within the institution, and alongside communities around Nova Scotia. Really excited to be here.
Thanks, everybody. And I want to note, like, we do this with purpose. Part of what you'll hear in our presentation is about building relationship, and having you seen and heard right from the beginning of the session is really important to us. And that's part of our practice generally, and we'll get into that. We definitely want to share a song with you. This song is called the Strong Woman Song. It was created by the Anishinaabe women who were imprisoned in the Kingston prison for women. It has since closed, but it was a way for them to uphold and support each other while they were there. Many of them were in solitary confinement, so they would beat on the walls of the prison as the drum beat, and they would sing this song to each other to support each other. And we just wanted to share that video with you. So it is a couple of minutes, and I will work to do that. Can you see my screen?
No, but you're sharing your computer sound.
Okay. Okay. And I think for us, Krista and I, this is a way for us to recognize the gifts of women in our community who are often overlooked and who are often stigmatized, but they have such beautiful things and gifts to bring and talents to bring to our community and to all communities, I think. I'll ask Krista to start her presentation.
So we've introduced ourselves. Yeah, really glad to again be here with you all this evening, this morning, whatever time zone you're in. So yeah, we want to talk a little bit about opening and grounding. As a Mi'kmaq woman, it's important to me to locate myself and ground myself when sharing learning opportunities or in teaching spaces. And I really appreciate that Karri-Lynn started us off with that song. That's another really great way to bring our hearts and minds together in a space like this. I'm also going to light smudge because that's my grounding practice. And again, you know, this looks differently depending on the nation or the community or the person, whatever their practice may be, to bring themselves and the people that they're with into the space together in one mind, and to be able to free our minds of distractions, to listen without judgment, to speak with truth and kindness, and always speak from the heart. And this is something that, you know, I've learned from elders in my community as I've been working in education for a little over 20 years in different capacities. And something that was always kind of difficult for me was, you know, having confidence and being able to speak publicly. And I had an elder teach me that, you know, if you find a practice that grounds you and helps you connect with the space that you're in and create a community of learning, of shared learning. So that's my practice, our practice, Karri-Lynn as well. We aim to ensure that our participants and those that we're in spaces like this with feel safe to share. So yeah, this is a safe and welcoming space. And appreciate you all being with us today.
So we're going to try to get through this. We started with our opening and a grounding. We hope to share some of our understanding of an abundance-based approach. We hope to talk about Indigenous approaches to community building and share some stories of abundance, which will be very familiar to Gord. And we usually start off with our circle practices, which I will let Krista explain.
You have to forgive me, it's been a minute since I had to navigate a presentation on Zoom. So yeah, as Karri-Lynn mentioned, when we started our time together, we went in a virtual circle to introduce ourselves, and that's just to be able to share the space together. So I'm just going to share a couple of quotes with you all. So circles are perhaps the most sacred Mi'kmaq concept. A circle is a reflection of a cycle, and there are many cycles found in nature and in life. Like a cycle flows continuously and repeatedly. Cycles are at the heart of nonlinear thought, the belief that the most important patterns and experiences are cyclical. This is just one example of pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is what we have used for thousands of years to survive. The circle representing cycles is the most important of all patterns in our lives, and circles are essential to healing journeys. So in circle practices, we ground our teaching style or our learning community on circles, because when we all come into circle, we are all coming in as equals. Everyone's voice and perspective is important and has a place in the circle. You know, and the other interesting thing, when we come together in circle to share learning, we get to hear the perspective of another person. You know, if you think about, you know, if there was an object in the middle of a circle, as you went around the circle and people describe what they saw, everyone would describe something slightly different. But at the end, we would all have a very holistic picture, a very holistic idea of that object, because we've heard everyone's perspective. And it helps us to establish a learning environment of trust, safety, and respect. And we are all circle people. You know, as Indigenous people, it's something that we do naturally in a lot of senses that we don't sometimes we don't recognize that we're using circle practices, because it's just a part of the way in which we do things. But through the work of the Circle of Abundance and building on abundance in Indigenous communities and the ABCD practices, we're a little more intentional with describing that circle practice and encouraging our participants and those that come into these learning spaces with us that that's the way in which we're doing it, because we want everyone to feel that they have a voice and that their perspective matters. And then we also encourage people to think about circle practices outside of their professional work. You can use it with your families. That's a great way to connect with your families, you know, asking about a specific idea or maybe what happened in their day. And it's really great for leadership practices in terms of connecting with your teams to know kind of where everyone's at in terms of like a check-in or what people are working on, and being able to get that holistic view of what's happening with your team. So that's something that we use in our personal practice to share with participants, but we also encourage people to bring it into their leadership practices.
So in true Coady fashion, we are not going to do all the talking. We're going to send you into an activity called Community 1 and Community 2. So actually, I'm just going to break you into two groups. You will, once you're in your group, I will send you a link in your messages. You just press on that link and it'll have your description of your community. And then we're going to ask you to address these two questions. So the description of your community and the two questions will be in that link that you're sent. So we're going to send you off. Does anyone have any questions before we go into those groups? No? Perfect. Here we go. Thanks, Michelle. Sorry, Amanda, I forgot to press record. And now community 2, what strategies would you, did you come up with?
I captured a couple of notes for that part, so I can read them, and then if anybody in the room wants to add others, please feel free. The first thing we talked about is really using circle practice and kind of leaning into that as a way of kind of hearing more from the community, and then kind of building from there, talking about, we talked about something that we could do is that, like, not just like having those conversations, but using that as a jumping off point for, like, what are we hearing the community wants? What are we hearing the community saying is like exciting or happening? And yeah, using that to kind of then direct whatever happens. And kind of at the end of the conversation, or the end of our time, we started to explore like ensuring that as community development organizations, we can make sure that we're giving real decision-making power to Indigenous community members. We had talked about like the importance of like giving that part of the community real weight in decisions that are being made, and in like what a focus is, and not just having like it be like, okay, well, here's one person and like their perspective, or like at the circle we heard this, but we have all these other community priorities, but really trying to center that community and what they're saying, and having that be a way forward. Anything else that I missed?
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so after we've heard both descriptions and talked about the different strategies that you might take to support the community with what they may need to do. But which community would you rather live in, and why? Anybody at all?
Obviously, the second one, where there were cultural opportunities and assurances, where there was some network and something happening. I sure would want to live there first.
I was struck in community 2, there were professionally engaged people. Therefore, I'd like to live there and interact with those folks.
Does anyone else want to share before we move on?
I just put in community 2, but then I was thinking, this is the same community. These communities are probably very similar. It's just the perspective that, or the narrative that people have put around each of, put around that community, but potentially it's the same community, just coming from different perspectives.
Well, Michelle took my aha moment, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, when Gord put community 3, I was like, hang on, actually. And then he's changed it to 2, but whether that was a typo or not.
It was a complete typo. I didn't have my glasses on.
But that's what took me down that path. So thank you for your typo, Gord.
Yeah, this is an actual community that we work with. They actually, we work with an organization called the Urban Aboriginal Voices Society out of Red Deer, Alberta. And this is actually community descriptions that they came up with. So they wrote these, and we agreed to share them for our work. And so, yeah, that's indeed what it was about. So A++ to Michelle. And I was going to ask you, Gord, what is community 3?
Yeah.
Describe that.
Like I say, it was completely a typo. I just reached for my keyboard and I hit the wrong number. So there's nothing deeper than that.
Anyone that works with Indigenous communities who these descriptions resonated with you? Yeah.
I would say not in an urban setting. I was in a very, very rural setting. I lived in the Amazon River Basin the last several years. But I could see parts of both of them within the communities that I worked in. I worked in a very professional setting and had colleagues that were Indigenous that, were going to college and studying and had big dreams for their own communities, and were sitting on their parroquias, but they're like their boards that covered different regions of the area I lived in. And then we had days where we were out in the communities, and you could just see it. You could see ways that, and in Ecuador, that Indigenous peoples do have rights. So they have their own federation that, stands up for their things, but where the government has come in years past and wanted land. And so they've just kind of taken for oil, or they're finding gold now in the riverbeds, and where they've just taken whole parts of the Amazon jungle that have been Shuar lands for years, and said, we'll pay you this amount of money per month. And so now you have these traditionally mobile communities that are stationed in one place, and now seemingly reliant on programs that are not sustainable or fulfilling to their peoples, and in this divide between, they have so much knowledge that I could never acquire in an institutionalized school, but there's also that lack there of, now they're being told they need to fit into this societalized school setting, which is so beneficial in some regards and so lacking in other regards, that I could see a lot of both of them in my friends and their families.
Thanks, Rachel. So important. Chris, I'll ask you to go to the next slide. And if I can invite everyone to just come off mute. And let's have a discussion. What do you think it is that we mean by abundance, especially in your own context? I think, Rachel, you touched on many great points of the abundance of knowledge in the communities you work with, but others, we'd love to hear from you. So what do you mean by abundance?
For me, I think abundance is a mindset. It's a way in which we see our community, whether, I suppose it goes back to the, the analogy of the glass half full, glass half empty. But for me, it's a way of seeing it and interpreting what we see as abundance. So it's a mindset.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
I think in this context, I don't mean abundance of things, but abundance of spirit, abundance of opportunity, abundance of those kinds of things, rather than the physical things.
Yeah. And I mean, I think growing up in an Indigenous community, I used to go out into the world and people would say to me, what is it like to live on a First Nation? What is it like to be an Indigenous person? And I think their expectation was really something that would come from a deficit lens, like the social problems, or, the addictions or things like that. Not that they didn't exist, but I talked to them about, how I had a very big family, and it was a very small community, and I was parented by many people that were not related to me. Like if I did anything wrong, my grandmother knew in about 5 minutes. So, like feeling that sense of, I guess, connection to people, and like like everyone in that community is your family. Those are the kind of things that I hung on to, not necessarily, not that those things didn't exist. There was alcoholism in my family, and There's hardships, but those weren't the things that I hung on to and that I expressed and the way that I talked about my community. Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide, Krista. So we want to show you a video. And Krista, can I ask you to share this? You can just click on that and that link should open. Since mine didn't share the last time.
Double click. Just go back and double click.
It may have opened in a new window that would have to be shared if you just shared to this tab.
And if you could stop it at 1 minute, Chris, that'd be great. Oh, I don't hear any sound.
Yeah, you might need to reshare and make sure you've clicked the share sound option on the bottom left corner when you're sharing your screen.
So I think this is a really great video. There's a leader in our communities and Indigenous communities in Canada. His name is Overton Mercady. He used to be the chief of the Assembly First Nations in Canada. And this is him speaking about Indigenous abundance prior to contact.
We got music.
I'm going to turn it up, Chris.
So before Canada and before the United States, Indigenous nations were masters in their own territory. We had philosophies, we had psychology, we had governance systems, we had food and military security, we had religious thought, political beliefs, ceremonies. We were a strong people. The last 150 years have been a struggle of survival for our people. Our way of life, which has been developed with precision over many centuries, was disrupted, not extinguished. Reconciliation is really about peaceful coexistence.
I really love the way he describes Indigenous philosophies and psychologies and ceremonies. I think it really shows the richness of Indigenous abundance. And so we like to show that in most of our courses to set the stage for that. And as you recognize, as you've all already spoke about, you know, this is seeing that glass is half full. You know, it's an asset-based approach. I think the wording that we chose that resonated with our communities was really abundance. So that abundance-based approach. So this is a word cloud. And so we asked in our last Building on Abundance class if everybody could send one of their gifts that they brought to the course. And these were some of their answers. You can go ahead, Chris. Again, you know, there's so many skills and assets. When I think about my own community, you know, I have a First Nations community, but we also have a community of women, Indigenous women leaders, that we see so many strengths and gifts in, whether it's our throat singers or our elders' gifts of spirituality, prayer, medicines, you know, humor, you know, there's so much. And I'll let Krista take the next one about labels.
So again, thinking back to that, the glass half full and, highlighting the abundance and the gifts, language and labels can be dangerous, can be harmful to our communities in terms of, I think about when I was younger, coming up, growing up in a space where you didn't hear a lot of good things spoken about our communities. If we happened to be in the news or on the newspaper, it was always something negative, like a really negative story. Sitting in classrooms, the only time I ever heard about our communities was from a deficit perspective in terms of, we have the highest rates of unemployment, the highest rates of, dropouts and jail and things like that. And when you grow up with that perspective of your community, it can be really difficult to have pride and self-confidence in where you come from. And we talk about that being an important part for Indigenous people in the spaces that they're in, is to be able to connect with their identity and feel really proud of where they're from and know where they're from. And they should be able to know where they're from in terms of that abundance of all the great gifts that their community holds, in terms of land or where they're at, and language, and their elders, all those different things. So helping to shift, that's another important piece to the work that we do with building on abundance, is shifting that language to one of abundance and positivity and gifts.
And so, Gord, can you remind me what the book that you put together with the stories, the ABCD stories, what that's called?
From clients to citizens, communities changing the course of their own development.
Right. So I saw that when I first came to Coady, and I thought, wouldn't it be really beautiful if we could create something like this, but with Indigenous stories? And what I came to know after spending time with Michelle and Dee and others in our ABCD and First Nations group, there was not a lot of stories out there that were talking about the abundance that took, the stories of abundance that took place in Indigenous communities. So we put this together. I think we have about 9 stories that were written by our graduates, and we asked permission for putting those into a booklet, and we use those in our courses. They're not publicly available. We ask for them for educational purposes, but I think we would be happy to share with you as long as you're using them for educational purposes. So if you'd like access to that, we'd be happy to send it in a PDF form. Maybe just leave us with your email before you leave. You can go on to the next one, Chris. And so many of you are probably familiar with this, these different kinds of assets. We just took these different kinds of assets and applied them to an Indigenous context. So when we thought of stories, we have so many different kinds of stories, whether it's stories of our history, stories of creation, our traditional knowledge stories, and stories about morals, or whether it's Indigenous knowledges or experiences, whether it's the community groups or social networks, whether it's Indigenous rights or cultural assets. We just tried to take the different kinds of assets and put them in an Indigenous context. Can anybody think of anything else that we could potentially add to this? And welcome, April. And Chelsea. I don't think you were here in the beginning. So is everybody, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Karri-Lynn, I was just going to say from my perspective, and it probably potentially actually comes under cultural assets, but we talk about law, so LORE, rather than LAW, which is really in essence the way we organise our communities. But yes, it probably actually fits under cultural assets when I think about it.
Mm.
All that knowledge, experience. But it's sort of almost like those governance practices that have always existed. It was just never called governance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anybody else want to jump in? And thanks, Gore. We are actually coming up. The next slide is the 7 principles.
I'm sure it hello?
Go ahead.
I'm sure it fits in like another category somewhere, but spiritual assets. I mean, I'm not from the Indigenous community, but I think it's a really important way of understanding the Indigenous community, but also understanding abundance for that community, for Turtle Island, for what we could make in the future. So
Absolutely. Thanks, Hope. And that's really at the top of our, Chris, do you want to go to the next slide? So for those of you who were not in the opening session, I actually unpacked these for the group in that session. But so we looked at some of our graduates. We looked at about 40 stories from our Indigenous graduates of Coady, and we asked them all to essentially do the same exercise. We asked them to write a story about something that they started on their own in their own communities, that they didn't need outside help, at least initially. And so we had this mass of stories, and we read through them and said, well, what are those things that keep reoccurring? And you know, any set of us that read those might come up with different principles, but these were the principles I think that we really touched on. We looked at the ABCD Institute's principles, we looked at Tamarack's principles, and these are really kind of where we landed. So every Indigenous person and community has gifts within, which is, you know, pretty obvious to Indigenous people, maybe not so obvious to others outside of our communities.
Could I add something? Or
Absolutely.
So I've been thinking about this since the openings plenary, and as I see them here, the one, and I love them. The one thing that, from my experience working in Indigenous communities as a settler, that really stands out to me is that it's not just that every person in community has gifts, it's that those gifts are shared. You know, like for example, my experience working in Cree and Ojibwe communities is there's no, in microcredit and microfinances, there's no words in those languages for personal savings. The closest thing is a word to hoard, you know, so there is an ethic of sharing those gifts that not necessarily other communities have to the same degree. Anyway, I don't know. You probably mean it in here anyway, but I'm just being explicit about it, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think there's also like a collective nature.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't know how you reflect it, but I think it's sort of in there already, but it's not as explicit as anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that ties in too with the you know, the teaching that many elders in our communities share around, we all have gifts. Every community member has a gift, and the importance of using those gifts, sharing those gifts. But along with that is a responsibility, like a role and responsibility within the community to share those gifts, to ensure that the community is well taken care of, and that you're, and I think that kind of plays into the other principles, you know, talking about, you know, as Karri-Lynn's going to share the rest of them. I think like that's where that comes in, that sharing and that responsibility kind of feeds into the other principles as well.
Yeah, really well said, Krista. Really well said. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
And do you think there is like a sense of not just sharing gifts, but a sense of responsibility back to the community in a non-Indigenous context?
It depends. sometimes there is, like the
Yeah.
community case study I wrote on St. Andrews, it's clearly there. But there's a lot of communities where that isn't as, and some communities have lost it.
Yeah, I'm at a conference right now with Indigenous women entrepreneurs from all across Canada, and they were talking about how one person was saying that they worked in a non-Indigenous context, but they really appreciated coming into an Indigenous context and working in an Indigenous organization, because then they felt like they had that sense of reciprocity, that they were giving back to their community. And I think a lot of the Indigenous women we work with, that is very much a part of their practice.
Well, so that's seven generation thinking, right? That we don't necessarily have in our non-Indigenous communities.
Absolutely. And I mean, number 2 is really shared everywhere. We start with what we already have. And there was so many stories that, whether it was everybody brought soup or everyone bought bread, or, it was whatever they had. It might not have been a lot, but they brought it. And that was the important place that they started. Again, starts with spirit. I think as Indigenous people, one of the things that we bring, I think, to the world is our spirituality, and the way that we have connection to our spirit and to the land. And this is some place where we saw, when things are started in a good way, when our partnerships are started in a good way, when our projects and our they're started in a good way, it brings a different energy. It's the same as we say with, starting with assets, starting with that spirit and intention of we're here because of the greater good, or we're here because we want to serve each other. That brings a certain energy, I think, to things. And you can see it over and over again. Krista, I think you've talked about this before, where like we've witnessed people, bringing projects forward, and they've started in ceremony. And I'll let you tell your stories, Krista.
Yeah, it was something for me that it was actually something that had to be intentional for me, like prior to some of the leadership and elders teachings that I've received over the last maybe 5 years. I always felt like maybe kind of that Western thinking was overriding, in terms of like spirituality maybe doesn't belong in education or Western spaces. But I had the privilege to work with a strong leader who made it a point that everything that we did in our work, in terms of projects or new initiatives, we literally took it to ceremony. We would go to, we'd hold pipe ceremony or go to a sweat lodge and pray about that project and bring that initiative forward. And then to see how things play out after that, doors opening, people calling just out of the blue with specific things that we needed and never, like, we hadn't had a chance to reach out to them yet. And them reaching out to us saying, hey, had this great idea, or maybe you guys need this, or, but also I think the important piece too was that it brought us together as a team. And it kept our team focused on the shared vision and the shared goal, which is the last principle. But keeping us focused on that shared vision, honoring our gifts, and reminding us of our responsibilities, because that all happens through ceremony. So yeah, I no longer think that spirit doesn't belong in education. I believe it's a huge part of our work, and that's where we need to start.
I'll let you do number 4 too, Chris.
So yeah, talking about relationships and connections are at the center. I think this is a really key one as well, because as you start to develop relationships and connections with one another, not only does that help you connect with your own gifts, helps you recognize the gifts in others, and those relationships often open up other opportunities in terms of other gifts or assets that you will then have access to. It also speaks to the way in which we work. So not wanting to rush things, being very flexible with our timelines in different projects to ensure that we're developing good relationships, and that we do our best to maintain those relationships, that we're not just coming in and, you know, doing a project or doing an initiative and then leaving, that we're doing our best to maintain those relationships, because that's the key. That's how we uplift one another. That's how we support one another's work. That's a huge part of our program, the Indigenous Women in Community Leadership, is really encouraging those relationships to be nourished and developed so that they can support one another even after the program is over. So I think that's a really important one as well.
Michelle, I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. I remember you telling us a story about the importance of the visiting before the project or before the, can you share that with everybody?
Yeah, it's that always, you know, share the stories and the importance of developing that relationship and trust. So it's like you've got to drink copious amounts of cups of tea is our currency. You know, having those cups of tea and listening to the elders, the aunties share their stories. You need to do that before you even start to talk about projects. Like, you know, and I find it's where a lot of Western organizations just rock up in communities and go, voila, here's the project we designed for you in Melbourne, and we're going to roll it out in this remote community in Arnhem Land because we're the experts. And then wonder why it doesn't bloody well work, you know? And it's because you haven't actually sat there and drank those cups of tea. You haven't had those yarning, you know, sat in yarning circles to understand what the community's all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was talking about. And that's so much linked to, you know, 4 and 5, you know, these relationships at the center, you know, sharing our stories and listening, listening to one another, you know, genuinely hearing each other and seeing each other, and having people actually feel heard and seen, I think definitely leads to action taking. You know, they feel a sense of participation, or that, again, that sense of responsibility, roles and responsibilities. I think it just helps instill that. You know, Indigenous leaders involving others, you know, having community members involved at every level, and having, you know, I just finished a study on Indigenous women's leadership. And one of the things that was really prominent was that many of the strong women that I interviewed said they were listened to from a very, very young age, that they had, you know, community meetings or family meetings, and they were asked to contribute as children, and they felt heard. And that was part of, you know, that was the beginning of their journey into being these strong community leaders. And so this one is like, they're also important, but they all seem important at different times for me. Like where it should be number one. And then the last one, you know, shared vision and decision making that honors the commitment to our future generations. So not making decisions in the short term that benefit only us, but thinking about how does our decision making impact the land? How does the decision making impact our children and our children's children? How do we make good decisions, whether they're business decisions or community decisions that uphold those values? And yeah, so those are the principles of abundance. And I would love to hear anybody's kind of reflections. Maybe you see this in your own work. Maybe you think some of these should be integrated into your work. Maybe you have other ones you think, yeah, we need this principle, it's missing. Terry, yeah.
So yeah, I'm really struck with point 3, start with spirit. And therefore, being a settler outside of the Indigenous community, I have an imagination on what that means. And whatever that means, I also am aware of when I'm working in other kinds of communities outside of Indigenous communities. I think starting with spirit is necessary or required, it would be beneficial, and yet I don't know how to introduce it. And so anyway, I find myself in a quandary trying to, one, understand what that really means in an Indigenous community and how that insight might be taken to communities outside of Indigenous communities. Am I making any sense whatsoever?
Yes. I actually have a teaching I'll like to share with you from a late elder Roxanne Tutusis, who provided me with lots of guidance and teachings. And she talked about how regardless of our backgrounds, regardless where we all come from, we all have a spirit. We all come from spirit. And whatever that looks like for you. So for some, it's prayer. For some, it's ceremony. For some, it's meditation or quiet reflection, being in nature, whatever that looks like for you, is bringing that into the space that you're in. So today, today we started with a song and a smudge, and that was to kind of bring all of us together, one mind, one spirit. And whatever that looks like. And so sometimes it's going back to the folks that you're in that space with. What does that mean to them? Maybe it's just a moment of quiet reflection to let people connect with whatever is meaningful for them in terms of spirituality. And it's really about meeting people where they're at. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I do find it helpful. And of course, my rational relationship to everything is I want to define it and I want it to be specific. And I find helpful what you described there is, no, let people themselves determine what that means. And then let's start from there.
Yeah, and I think there's often that confusion when we're talking to non-Indigenous community, right? Because for us, spirituality is so ingrained in who we are and the way we practice everything. It's not like religion that I think can sometimes be separate, or it requires a space or a place, and so there's some confusion over that. But the best, I think Krista gave the best advice. Ask the people what they consider spirit and how they see it integrated into the work, and I think just listening to the communities we're working with is at the core of that. I know we're getting to the end of time, so I just want to move forward for Krista to share an example of all this work from her own community. So I'm just going to skip over some of these things. Okay. Go for it, Chris.
Sorry, my mouse is kind of acting weird. So yes, the Nita bar. So there's a chocolate company in Antigonish called Peace by Chocolate, and they are a Syrian family. And when they came to Canada and to Antigonish, and they started this, actually they're continuing this business. It's a family business that's been in their part of their family for a long time. And part of it, so they wanted to make sure that they were honoring the Mi'kmaq, the First Nations people of the territory that they had moved to. They came and connected with our community to talk about what they wanted to do was to develop to have a chocolate bar that would be named by our community, and the proceeds from that chocolate bar would go back to support programming within our community. So they came up with the Need Up bar. Need Up means friend or buddy, and it directly supports the Need Up program in our community, which is a program where community members can come together and learn different traditional crafting or different teachings. They invite in different elders or different community members, knowledge keepers to come in and share how to bead or how to make a drum, things like that. And yeah, it's totally supported by this delicious chocolate bar. But the relationship has been maintained since this first idea. So they continue to do it. And I think it's just an amazing community-minded project that came from, you know, immigrants who had come here seeking a new life and wanting to honor the first peoples of this land and giving back. So such a beautiful representation of reciprocity.
Thanks, Krista. I'm a big movie buff, and this is one of my new favorite quotes. The movie is crazy. It's called Everything Everywhere All at Once. If you haven't seen it, it's very interesting. But I really love one of the characters in the movie says, "When I choose to see the good side of things, I'm not being naive. It is just strategic and necessary. It's how I've learned to survive through everything." And I think this is such an ABCD kind of quote. And yeah, I really love that one. We have about 5 minutes left. If you don't have anything, Amanda, do we need to do anything to wrap this up? No, I would love to hear from each of you, just one word that you're taking away or reflecting on our time together. So if we could hear from everybody, that'd be great. Do you want to stop sharing, Chris? Thanks.
Hi, this is April. I don't know if do you want us to put it in the chat or speak it?
No, speak it out, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I love. No, I was so moved by just the practice of bringing everything to ceremony, and I want to keep like letting that move through me and what that might look like. But I really appreciate that so much.
Thanks, April. Everybody. Come on, Terry, you're off mute.
Well, this Terry, and I'm going to take away, start with spirit.
Thank you.
One thing I'm going to take away is actually thinking through the process of ABCD going into a community, just because you're constantly catching yourself, like trying to save, you know, trying to help. And so I'll take that away.
Thanks, Hope.
I'm going to take, oh, sorry, go ahead, Anna.
Go for it, Amanda.
Go for it.
I'm going to take away the expansiveness of abundance. I feel like that's more instinctive right now.
And I can go next. I will take away the principles. I really want to learn more from your work. So if you have any link or anything, please. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank
Rachel? Thanks, Anna.
I don't remember how you said it, but sit down and drink the tea, or in my case, the chicha is what we drink. And if they don't offer it to you, you're not invited. So sit down and drink it.
Thanks, Rachel. Gord, Chelsea, Jess, Michelle.
Well, the drinking tea part reminds me of an elder saying you right to forget, you know, it's about active listening, really active listening and taking it all in, and engaging fully, not just going there with your notepad.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm going to take away is how awesome you two are.
Thanks, Gord.
Agreed. This also just brings up kind of an emergent strategy principle of moving at the speed of trust. And so
Nice.
I definitely relate to the, sitting down, drinking tea, building that relationship. That should be the primary goal that we have.
I love that. We might borrow that, moving at the speed of trust.
Jess, Michelle.
My takeaway is that that constant reminder that we're more like everything that you talk about, Karri-Lynn and Krista, resonates with me, even though we're thousands of miles away. There's more that actually unites, not just First Nations communities, but all communities, that actually divides us. And it starts with relationships. It's about being people. So thank you. And want to see you guys in Darwin.
I feel I'm walking away feeling just immensely grateful, and being able to hear you and Krista share. I feel that I'm always learning new things, and really excited for some more work together into the future.
Well, we're very grateful that you all showed up and that you all participated, and we're honored to have spent the time with you, Krista.
Yes, thank you all. I also learned so much from all of you, and very grateful that you all chose to spend your time with us today.
We're 1 minute over.
Hey.
So thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Take good care. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks all.